Chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. The fix is in. Even with the face-saving indictment last week of Hunter Biden, everyone knows the fix is in. 4.5 years. 4.5 years the Department of Justice has been investigating Mr. Biden, an investigation run by David Weiss, an investigation that limited the number of witnesses agents could interview, an investigation that prohibited agents from referring to the president as the, quote, big guy in any of the interviews they did get to do, an investigation that curtailed attempts to interview Mr. Biden by giving the transit team secret a heads up, an investigation that notified Mr. Biden's defense counsel about a pending search warrant, an investigation run by Mr. Weiss, where they told the Congress 3 different stories in 33 days. They told this committee on June 7th, David Weiss said, I have ultimate authority to determine when, where, and whether to bring charges. 23 days later, June 30th, he told this committee, actually, I can only bring charges in my U.S. Attorney's District, the District of Delaware. And then to further confuse matters, on July 10th, he told Senator Graham, I have not sought special counsel status. Rather, I've had discussions with the Department of Justice. An investigation run by Mr. Weiss that negotiated a plea deal that the federal district court declined to accept. A plea deal so ridiculous, the judge asked this question, quote, is there any precedence for agreeing not to prosecute crimes that have nothing to do with the charges being diverted? The response from the DOJ lawyer, I'm not aware of any, Your Honor. A plea deal so ridiculous that the judge also asked, have you ever seen a diversion agreement where the agreement not to prosecute was so broad that it encompasses crimes in a different case? The response from the DOJ lawyer, no, Your Honor, we haven't. An investigation run by Mr. Weiss that not only had a sweetheart deal rejected, but according to the New York Times, there was an even sweeter deal, an earlier deal, a deal in which Mr. Biden would not have to plead guilty to anything. 4.5 years and all that, and now we get a special counsel. Now we get a special counsel, and who does the Attorney General pick? David Weiss, the guy who let all that happen. He could have selected anyone. He could have picked anyone inside government, outside government. He could have picked former attorney generals, former special counsels, but he picks the one guy he knows will protect Joe Biden. He picks David Weiss. And here's what the AG said in his August 11th announcement of David Weiss as a special counsel. Quote, I am confident that Mr. Weiss will carry out his responsibility in an even-handed and urgent manner. Urgent manner, every witness we've talked to, the 2 FBI whistleblowers that came forward, Mr. Shapley, Mr. Ziegler, the 2 FBI agents on the case, Mr. Sobocinski, Ms. Hawley, they've all said this thing was anything but urgent. The FBI said they were frustrated at the pace. Ms. Hawley said she was frustrated at the pace. And of course, the IRS agents, they said the investigation was slow-walked. And even-handed, they limited the number of witnesses that could be interviewed. They tipped off the defense counsel about a subpoena. The judge says the plea deal was a joke. And all that's just half the story. There's one investigation protecting President Biden. There's another one attacking President Trump. Justice Department's got both sides of the equation covered. Look at the classified documents case. Spring and early summer of last year, the Department of Justice asked President Trump to turn over boxes of documents. He does just that. In the process, President Trump finds 38 additional documents. He tells the Department of Justice, the very next day the FBI comes to his home and he turns them over. Then the Department of Justice asked the president to put any boxes he brought from the White House to his home in his storage room and secure it by locking it. He does that as well. Everything they asked him to do, he did. And then what's the Justice Department do? August 8th, last year, they raid President Trump's home. And according to the FBI agent, Stephen D'Antuono, the assistant director in charge of the Washington field office, the search was a complete departure from standard protocol. When we interviewed Mr. D'Antuono, he said, first, the Miami field office didn't do the search. Instead, they sent folks from D.C. He said there was no U.S. attorney assigned to the case. Instead, it was run by D.C., in particular Jay Bratt, who's now on the special counsel team. He said the FBI didn't get President Trump's counsel's approval before they did the search. And then Mr. D'Antuono told us he had recommended that when the FBI got to Mr. Trump's home, President Trump's home, they contact his counsel, wait for him to get there and do the search together. Of course, the DOJ said no. And then who does the Attorney General name as special counsel in that case? Jack Smith, the guy who a few years ago was looking for ways to prosecute Americans, targeted by Lois Lerner and the IRS, looking to prosecute the very victims of the weaponized government, the weaponized IRS. Jack Smith, the guy who prosecuted Governor McDonald, only to have the Supreme Court overturn that prosecution in a unanimous decision. That's the guy that the Attorney General of the United States selects as special counsel. And you wonder why 4 out of 5 Americans believe there are now 2 standards of justice in our great country. Mr. Garland, I anticipate a number of questions on these 2 investigations. Later in the hearing, I expect from Republicans you will also get questions about the many other concerns the school board's memorandum, treating Catholics, the memo that said pro-life Catholics are extremists, the Fifth Circuit decision, great decision, on the Department of Justice and other agencies censoring American speech, and of course the FISA law that's up for reauthorization this year, and how that process has been abused and infringed on the rights, the privacy rights of the American people. Americans believe that today in our country there is unequal application of the law. They believe that because there is. Republicans are committed to making that change. With that, I would yield to the gentleman from New York, the ranking member, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, at the outset, let me make 2 comments. One, just about every assertion you made in your opening statement has been completely refuted by witnesses who have testified before this committee. 2, far from being favored, many commentators have noted that people accused of simple gun possession while under the influence of a drug, when that gun was not used in the commission of a crime, are rarely, if ever, prosecuted the way Hunter Biden is being prosecuted. Mr. Chairman, one of this committee's most important duties is conducting oversight of the Department of Justice. We are called upon to ensure that the DOJ uses the enormous amount of power it is granted in a fair, just manner that respects the civil and human rights of all Americans. The Attorney General of the United States oversees issues that affect the lives of each and every American. Violent crime, drug trafficking, attacks on our civil rights, threats to our national security, and environmental crimes all fall under his purview. That is why we regularly request that he or she appear before this committee to speak about the work the department is doing for the welfare of the country. This is how we ensure that the department stays accountable to the American people. But if it were up to the Republicans, Americans would hear nothing about any of these substantive issues today. They would hear nothing about the rise in domestic terrorism and what the Justice Department is doing about it. They would hear nothing about what the department is doing to stop hate crimes and prevent gun violence. They would hear nothing about how the department is disrupting efforts by Russia, China, and others to interfere in our elections. Extreme MAGA Republicans have poisoned our vital oversight work. They've ignored our legitimate oversight responsibilities and used their power to stage one political stunt after another. They have wasted countless taxpayer dollars on baseless investigations into President Biden and his family, desperate to find evidence for an absurd impeachment and desperate to distract from the mounting legal peril facing Donald Trump. They have fought tirelessly to stop efforts to fight malign foreign actors trying to influence and manipulate Americans through social media. They have unconstitutionally interfered in criminal litigation and attempted to bully state and local law enforcement officers. They have publicized the names of witnesses who did not further their political goals, leading to threats of death and physical violence against those witnesses and their families. They have cost any number of private institutions and companies millions of dollars in legal fees as they struggle to respond to ridiculous and overbroad requests for information and transcribed interviews. They have issued subpoenas for show without making meaningful attempts to get the information they seek by consent. They have levied low, baseless personal attacks on any prosecutor to bring charges against Donald Trump or January 6th rioters. They have attempted to discredit investigators who are not hard enough on Donald Trump's political opponents. They have supported those involved in the deadly attack on our Capitol on January 6th in an attempt to overthrow a lawful election. They have justified conduct that we all know to be wildly illegal, like the theft of classified materials and incitement to violence. And through it all, rather than try to unite the country or solve the problems that affect us all, they have sought to exploit our divisions for cynical, personal political gain. That is their goal, division. They want to divide this country and make our government appear like it's broken, because that is when their broken political party thrives. So today, I implore the public to see through the sham. I have no doubt that you will hear a deluge of conspiracy theories and baseless accusations. They will quote freely from so-called whistleblowers who have been broadly discredited or contradicted. They will viciously attack federal law enforcement. They will tell you that all 91 criminal charges against Donald Trump are part of a conspiracy, despite overwhelming evidence of each of Donald Trump's crimes. And they will attack Special Counsel Weiss, who was appointed, let us not forget, by Donald Trump, for not being hard enough on Hunter Biden. Republicans will continue doing what they've done for years, discrediting anyone who does not serve their political goals at any cost. And the shame of it is that in this hearing room, like on the House floor, where we are barreling towards a government shutdown while my Republican colleagues call each other names, we could be working together to put people over politics and to solve any number of problems affecting the American people. More than 30,000 Americans have died from gun violence so far this year alone. Guns have become the leading cause of death for children aged 1 to 17, surpassing car accidents. Domestic violent extremism and white nationalism are on the rise. We are seeing active clubs and other white supremacist groups pop up around the country. Anti-Semitism is at an all-time high. Malign foreign actors like Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea are attempting to influence our elections. Political rhetoric is causing threats against law enforcement officials. The court system is in desperate need of reform. Our election workers receive death threats from conspiracy theory-driven extremists. Fentanyl is filling our streets and poisoning our children at historic rates. This list goes on, and we, the people in this room, are in a position to do something about it. In fact, it is our duty to do something about it, consistent with the oath we took when we were sworn in as members of Congress. We could work with the Department of Justice and Attorney General Garland to address any number of real substantive problems facing the American people. Instead, House Republicans will use their time today to talk about long discredited conspiracy theories and Hunter Biden's laptop. And they will do it because they care more about Donald Trump than they do about their own constituents. I hope my colleagues will see reason and at least attempt to work with the Attorney General in good faith. Sadly, on the other side of the aisle, reason and good faith seem to be in short supply. In any event, Mr. Attorney General, I thank you for your testimony and thank you in advance for your patience. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back without objection. All other opening statements will be in the record. The Honorable Merrick Garland is the Attorney General of the United States. He was sworn in on March 11, 2021. We welcome our witness. Thank him for appearing today. We will begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record show that the witness has answered in the affirmative. Thank you. You can be seated. Please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony. You know how this is done, Mr. Garland. You've been here before. We want to again thank you for being here. You're welcome to give your opening statement.
I'm sorry, is this working? Yeah.
You got it.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Nadler, and distinguished members of this committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you on behalf of the more than 115,000 employees of the Department of Justice. Since the Justice Department was founded, it has been tasked with confronting some of the most challenging issues before the country. Today, we are handling matters of significant public interest that carry great consequences for our democracy. A lot has been said about the Justice Department, about who we are and what we are doing, about what our job is and what it is not, and about why we do this work. I want to provide some clarity. First, who we are. The Justice Department is made up of more than 115,000 men and women who work in every state and communities across the country and around the globe. They are FBI, DEA, ATF agents, and United States Marshals who risk their lives to serve their communities. They are prosecutors and staff who work tirelessly to enforce our laws. The overwhelming majority are career public servants, meaning that they were not appointed by the president of any party. Second, I want to provide clarity about what the job of the Justice Department is and about what it is not. Our job is to help keep our country safe. That includes working closely with local police departments and communities across the country to combat violent crime. In fact, today we are announcing the results of a recent U.S. Marshals operation conducted with state and local law enforcement. That operation targeted violent fugitives and resulted in 4,400 arrests across 20 cities in just 3 months. Our work also includes combating the drug cartels that are poisoning Americans. Last Friday, we extradited Lopez of the Sinaloa cartel from Mexico to the United States. He is a son of El Chapo and one of more than a dozen cartel members we have indicted and extradited to the United States. Our job includes seeking justice for the survivors of child exploitation, human smuggling, and sex trafficking. And it includes protecting democratic institutions like this one by holding accountable all those criminally responsible for the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Our job is also to protect civil rights. That includes protecting our freedoms as Americans to worship and think as we please, and to peacefully express our opinions, our beliefs, and our ideas. It includes protecting the right of every eligible citizen to vote and to have that vote counted. It includes combating discrimination, defending reproductive rights under law, and deterring and prosecuting attacks such as hate crimes. And our job is to uphold the rule of law. That means we apply the same laws to everyone. There is not one set of laws for the powerful and another for the powerless, one for the rich and another for the poor, one for Democrats and another for Republicans, or different rules depending upon one's race or ethnicity or religion. Our job is to pursue justice without fear or favor. Our job is not to do what is politically convenient. Our job is not to take orders from the president, from Congress, or from anyone else about who or what to criminally investigate. As the president himself has said, and I reaffirm today, I am not the president's lawyer. I will add, I am not Congress's prosecutor. The Justice Department works for the American people. Our job is to follow the facts and the law, and that is what we do. All of us recognize that with this work comes public scrutiny, criticism, and legitimate oversight. These are appropriate and important given the matters and the gravity of the matters that are before the department. But singling out individual career public servants who are just doing their jobs is dangerous, particularly at a time of increased threats to the safety of public servants and their families. We will not be intimidated. We will do our jobs free from outside influence, and we will not back down from defending our democracy. Third, I want to explain why we approach our job in this way. The Justice Department was founded in the wake of the Civil War and in the midst of Reconstruction with the first principal task of bringing to justice white supremacists and others who terrorize Black Americans to prevent them from exercising their civil rights. The Justice Department's job then and now is to fulfill the promise that it is at the foundation of our democracy, that the law will treat each of us alike. That promise is also why I am here. My family fled religious persecution in Eastern Europe at the start of the 20th century. My grandmother, who was one of 5 children, born in what is now Belarus, made it to the United States, as did 2 of her siblings. The other 2 did not. Those 2 were killed in the Holocaust. And there is little doubt that but for America, the same thing would have happened to my grandmother. But this country took her in, and under the protection of our laws, she was able to live without fear of persecution. That protection is what distinguishes this country from so many others. The protection of law, the rule of law, is the foundation of our system of government. Repaying this country for the debt my family owes, for our very lives, has been the focus of my entire professional career. That is why I served in the Justice Department under 5 different attorneys general under both Democratic and Republican administrations. That is why I spent more than 25 years ensuring the rule of law as a judge, and that is why I left a lifetime appointment as a judge and came back to the Justice Department 2.5 years ago. And that is why I'm here today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. And you were right. America is the greatest country ever, and we on this side, I know, are very concerned about the equal application of the law that you talked about in your opening statement. With that, we'll move to 5-minute questions, and we will start with the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. Mr. Weiss, the rule of law does distinguish our country, but you have not upheld that. You have allowed the rule of law to erode, and that's why 65% of the people in this country have no faith in the Department of Justice under your leadership. They don't trust it. They don't trust you. The reason is because they're witnessing every day a politicized Justice Department in a 2-tiered system of justice. For example, they see the DOJ, of course, aggressively prosecuting President Biden's chief political rival, Mr. Trump, while at the same time, they see slow walking and special treatment given to the president's son. That's just a fact that everybody can see with their own 2 eyes. I want to focus on that investigation of the Biden family. We have many important questions for you today about that. Let me just get right to the chase. Has anyone from the White House provided direction at any time to you personally or to any senior officials at the DOJ regarding how the Hunter Biden investigation was to be carried out?
No.
Have you had personal contact with anyone at FBI headquarters about the Hunter Biden investigation?
I don't recollect the answer to that question, but the FBI works for the Justice Department. It's
I'm sorry. You don't recollect whether you've talked with anybody at FBI headquarters about an investigation of the president's son?
I don't believe that I did. I promised the Senate when I came before it for confirmation that I would leave Mr. Weiss in place and that I would not interfere with his investigation.
Okay,
I have kept that promise.
All right. Have you had personal contact with anybody at the Baltimore field office on the Hunter Biden matter?
No.
On July 10, 2023, U.S. Attorney David Weiss told Senator Lindsey Graham, quote, I had discussions with departmental officials regarding potential appointment under 28 U.S.C. Section 515, which would have allowed me to file charges in a district outside my own without the partnership of the local U.S. attorney, end quote. With whom did Mr. Weiss have those discussions?
I'm not going to get into the internal deliberations of the department.
Oh, but you must, sir. This is important for us. We have oversight responsibility over your department, and we need these answers.
As appropriate, necessary for Mr. Weiss to have conversations with the department. I made clear that if he wanted to bring a case in any jurisdiction, he would be able to do that. The way you do that is to get an order signed by the Attorney General called a 515 order. I promised he would be able to do that, and he in his letters made clear he understood he would be able to do that.
Okay. Can you tell us about any briefings or discussions that you personally have had with Mr. Weiss regarding any and all federal investigations of Hunter Biden?
I'm going to say again, I promised the Senate that I would not interfere with Mr. Weiss.
So you have not, I'm just, under oath today, your testimony is you have not had any discussions with Mr. Weiss about this matter?
Under oath, my testimony today is that I promised the Senate I would not intrude in his investigation. I do not intend to discuss the internal Justice Department deliberations, whether or not I had them.
Oh, okay. So your testimony today is you're not going to tell us whether you've had discussions with Mr. Weiss.
My testimony today is I told the committee that I would not interfere. I made clear that Mr. Weiss would have the authority to bring cases that he thought were appropriate.
Okay.
Mr. Weiss's
All right.
letter.
Okay, let me stop you. For sake of time, sir, are you aware that FBI officials have come before this committee and they have stated that there was a cumbersome bureaucratic process that Mr. Weiss had to go through to bring charges in another judicial district? You know that?
I'm not aware, but that's not true. There's nothing cumbersome about the process.
So those
All I
whistleblowers
need
are
to-
lying to us under oath? Those whistleblowers are lying?
I
Is
didn't
your
say
testimony?
that. Their description of the process is cumbersome is an opinion. It's not a fact question. All I have to do is
Okay,
sign a
all right,
section.
let me get to the fact. Mr. Weiss has been the lead prosecutor on the Hunter Biden case since 2018, correct?
I'm sorry?
Mr. Weiss has been the lead prosecutor on the Hunter Biden case since 2018. Now, here's the question.
He's been the lead prosecutor since he was appointed by President Trump.
Okay,
And
why,
assigned-
let me ask you, why has the Justice Department dragged this investigation out for so long? Does it really take years to determine if Hunter Biden lied on a federal form related to purchasing a firearm?
Mr. Weiss was a long-time career prosecutor. President Trump appointed him as the
You're not answering the question. Is that standard procedure? Should it take that long to make such a simple determination?
I'm answering the question. Give me an opportunity to do so.
Okay?
He was charged with that investigation under the previous administration. He's continued. He knows how to conduct investigations, and I have not intruded or attempted to evaluate that because that was the promise I made to the Senate.
The whistleblowers gave us testimony about serious misconduct at the Justice Department in regards to the preferential treatment afforded Hunter Biden. Has your office requested an investigation into that?
There are well-known processes for how whistleblowers make their claims. I am a strong proponent of whistleblowers and a strong defender. We have an Inspector General's office. We have an Office of Professional Responsibility. That is the way in which complaints from whistleblowers should be and are appropriately handled.
I'm out of time. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Nadler. Okay, Dan.
Thank you. Mr. Attorney General, thank you for being here today. It's no secret that some of my colleagues across the aisle have threatened to shut down the government unless and until the FBI and the Department of Justice are defunded. One Trump-light presidential candidate has said that we should abolish the FBI altogether. Mr. Attorney General, what would be the impact on the FBI?
Defunding the FBI would leave the United States naked to the malign influence of the Chinese Communist Party, to the attacks by Iranians on American citizens and attempts to assassinate former officials, to the Russian aggression, to North Korean cyber attacks, to violent crime in the United States, which the FBI helps to fight against, to all kinds of espionage, to domestic violent extremists who have attacked our churches, our synagogues, our mosques, and who have killed individuals out of racial hatred. I cannot imagine the consequences of defunding the FBI, but they would be catastrophic.
Thank you. I want to turn to Mr. Weiss's investigation and the authority he's been granted to conduct that investigation without interference in whatever way he deems necessary. You testified to the Senate Judiciary Committee on March 1st of this year that David Weiss had, quote, full authority over any investigation concerning Hunter Biden. Was that a true statement at the time?
Yes, Mr. Weiss has full authority to conduct his investigation however he wishes, and Mr. Weiss has confirmed that in letters to this committee.
Thank you. This authority included ensuring that Weiss would be able to bring charges in jurisdiction outside of Delaware if necessary. Is that correct?
I assured Mr. Weiss publicly that he would have the authority to bring a case outside of Delaware if he thought that was appropriate.
Does that remain true today?
Yes, that is true today.
Has it ever been the case over the course of this investigation that Mr. Weiss would not have been able to bring charges outside of Delaware if warranted?
As a matter of my authority, I promised he would be able to do that. I think as is apparent in the letters exchanged with the committee and in my previous testimony, in order for a United States attorney or a special counsel or anyone else to bring a case outside of his jurisdiction, it requires me to sign a paper called Section 515. That's the statute which permits bringing cases outside of the jurisdiction. I promised that I would do whatever was required to enable Mr. Weiss to bring a case outside his jurisdiction if that's what he thought was appropriate.
And I assume it was your understanding that Mr. Weiss was fully aware that he could bring charges outside of Delaware if necessary when you testified on March 1st.
Mr. Weiss has said so in the letters he sent to this committee.
Thank you. Did he ever say or do anything that might make him unsure of where he could bring charges?
Mr. Weiss's own letters reflect that he had never asked me to be special counsel and that he understood the process for asking for a signature on a Section 515 form.
There have been accusations that the handling of the Hunter Biden matter is an example of a two-tiered system of justice. What's your response to that allegation?
The Justice Department treats everyone alike, regardless of party, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of wealth. Everyone is treated alike. I understand that people may not understand why particular investigations are conducted in particular ways until all the facts come out. That's what we have a court for, and all of the explanations will come out with respect to Mr. Weiss, for example. At the end of his period as special counsel, one of the requirements is that he file a report, which I have promised to make public to the extent that's lawful and to explain his decisions to prosecute and not to prosecute.
Thank you. What are the impacts of members of Congress making such accusations against the DOJ? Do baseless accusations from government officials make it more difficult for investigators to do their job and effectively investigate the subject?
Members of the Justice Department are strong and tough and able to understand that their job is to do the right thing regardless of any pressures from any quarter. What is dangerous, and I'm not talking about the committee, but what is dangerous is when anyone singles out a career prosecutor or a career FBI agent, and we know as a matter of fact that that kind of singling out has led to threats. This is a concern across the board. It is not a concern about anyone in particular.
I think you would have been justified in referring to the committee. My time has expired. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Attorney General, you're the only person who could ensure that Mr. Weiss had all the necessary authority, aren't you?
I'm the only person who can sign an agreement with respect to special counsel. The authority to do Section 515 can be signed by other people in the department.
You're aware, ultimately, though, the authority is yours.
Yes.
You made the point that you don't take orders from the president about such things. You decide, ultimately, what the Justice Department will do.
I announced at the beginning, I promised that he would be able to bring whatever cases he wants, and I have followed through on that promise. I'm permitted to make that kind of promise, and I have made it.
Did you undertake to inform yourself, to interact with him sufficient to ensure that he knew he possessed that authority, or that you would see to it that he had all necessary
I
authority?
don't think there's any doubt that he knew. He has written 3 letters to this committee indicating that he understood he had that authority.
You're also aware, though, aren't you, sir, that a senior IRS investigator, whistleblower, came forward and testified publicly that Mr. Weiss stated that he did not have such authority. He was not the decider. Are you aware of that?
I'm aware of the testimony. I was not present at any point during that statement. And Mr. Weiss, who was present, has indicated that he had the authority and he knew that he had it.
Subsequent to those developments, though, you decided to make Mr. Weiss special counsel, which you had not done before.
Mr. Weiss made clear he did not ask me to be special counsel until last month, and last month I made him special counsel.
Did you have some lack of information that you should have had that would have caused you to act earlier to make him special counsel?
Mr. Weiss did not ask to be special counsel before.
I understand he didn't ask. You've said that, sir. Did you take the necessary steps to inform yourself what authority he understood he had or what obstacles he was encountering?
Look, Mr. Weiss had, as I said from the beginning, at the very beginning, that he had authority over all matters that pertain to under Biden.
Have you learned that he was in fact deterred by decisions of the United States attorneys in the District of Columbia and the Northern District of California from proceeding as he thought best?
With respect, Congressman, Mr. Weiss has not said that he was deterred. He said that he followed the normal processes of the department and that he was never denied the ability to bring a case in another jurisdiction.
Well, what changed then, Mr. Attorney General? What made you decide that it was sufficient to leave him in the situation he was until you decided to make him special counsel?
Mr. Weiss asked for that authority given the extraordinary circumstances of this matter, and given my promise that I would give him any resources he requested, I made him special counsel.
So until that time, was it just a matter of his predilection, or did you undertake to investigate and discern what he was doing with his authority and whether he had faced any obstacles?
I did not endeavor to investigate because I had promised that I would not interfere with this investigation. The way to not interfere is to not investigate an investigation.
Once he requested to be named special counsel, having not done so over months and months of your tenure, did you ask him what had changed that made him now need to be a special counsel?
Mr. Weiss asked to be made special counsel. I had promised that I would give him all the resources he needed, and I made him special counsel.
When did the Justice Department permit statutes of limitations to expire on some of the prospective charges against Hunter Biden for tax violations?
I don't know anything about the statute of limitations here. The investigation was in the hands of Mr. Weiss to make the determinations that he thought were appropriate.
Are you unaware that statutes of limitations have in fact been allowed to expire after there having been tolling agreements in place?
I'm going to say again, the determination of where to bring cases and which kinds of cases to bring was left to Mr. Weiss.
Yes, sir. I understand that you've said that. That's part of the problem. The question is, are you aware that statutes of limitations have been allowed to expire while the matter was under investigation?
The investigators were fully familiar with all the relevant law.
I'm not asking for the excuses. I'm asking whether you're aware of that fact, sir.
I'm going to say again. I'm going to say again and again if necessary. I did not interfere with, did not investigate, did not make determinations.
Those are statements in response to other questions. Everybody in the country now knows who's paying attention to this, that the Justice Department permitted statutes of limitations to expire. Every lawyer who's ever practiced understands the implications of allowing statutes of limitations to expire. Do you not even know as you sit here whether that occurred or not?
Prosecutors make appropriate determinations on their own. In this case, I left it to Mr. Weiss whether to bring charges or not. That would include whether to let statute of limitations expire or not, whether there was sufficient evidence to bring a case that was subject to the statute of limitations or not, whether there were better cases to bring or not.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Attorney General, for being here with us this morning. You know, as much as we see dirt being thrown in the air, there's a lot of misinformation that I think is intended to confuse people. I would like to ask unanimous consent to put into the record 3 letters from Mr. Weiss that he sent to Congress on June 7th, June 30th, and July 10th.
Without objection.
He said over and over again that he has full authority over this case, including the ability to seek special counsel or special attorney status if needed. You know, trying to imply otherwise is just simply false. Mr. Weiss was appointed by then President Trump. Your decision was to leave the Trump-appointed attorney completely in charge of this, hands off from you. He makes all the calls with interfere. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so the idea that you would interfere is completely wrong. And I'd also like to ask, you talked about your independence from the president, but also your independence from the Congress. Have you ever come across historically an instance where the Congress of the United States tried to or successfully interfered with a prosecution initiated by the Department of Justice based on the facts and the law?
I want to be gentle about the word interfere, but it is, just as a historical example, in the case of Iran-Contra, the consequences of actions by the Congress were that the special counsel's investigation of Iran, of Mr. North, were dismissed.
Correct. Before I go into another question I have, I just would like unanimous consent to put into the record the annual statistical transparency report dated April of 2023. It indicates that the deduplicated counting method for FBI queries of U.S. persons under database numbered over 119,000. I would just like to note, and we will work with you, this committee on a bipartisan basis is very concerned about querying of the 702 database for U.S. persons without a warrant. We're not suggesting that the law does not permit that, but we are going to visit this issue because it is my view that querying the 702 database that has been collected without due process, because it relates to foreign individuals, is completely wrong in terms of the privacy rights of Americans. And I'm hoping that we can work successfully with you as we craft requirements for a warrant to do that querying. I'd like to ask, as we know, and has been mentioned by the ranking member, the proposal is basically to defund the police by the Republicans, to defund the FBI. I am concerned that if we defund the police, as the majority has suggested, that really doesn't have an impact on the statute of limitations. So if we were to defund the Department of Justice, defund the FBI and the police, as has been suggested, what would happen with the statute of limitations for cases that you were pursuing if you were not able to actually do that? Would they be suspended anyway, or would the criminals get off scot-free?
Well, I know in my experience as a judge, if I was asked a legal question and I don't know the answer, I would go back to the office and study it, and I'll have to do that in this case. I don't have the answer.
Well, I think I do, because there's nothing in the statute that allows for the statute of limitations to be suspended because the government has been shut down or because the police have been defunded through the budget process. And I just think we ought to take the implications of a shutdown very seriously in terms of allowing criminals to get off. And I see that my time has expired, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
General yields back. Chair does not recognize himself. Quote, Mr. Weiss has full authority to bring cases in other jurisdictions if he feels it's necessary. That was your response, Attorney General, to Senator Grassley's question on March 1st, 2023. You just referenced it when Mr. Bishop was questioned. The only problem is found by the U.S. Attorney in the District of Columbia, Mr. Graves. So he didn't have full authority, did he?
I had an extended conversation with Senator Grassley at the time. We briefly touched on the Section 515 question and how that process went. I've never been suggested.
My point's real simple, Mr. Garland. You said he had complete authority, but he'd already been turned down. He wanted to bring an action in the District of Columbia, and the U.S. Attorney there said, no, you can't. And then you go tell the United States Senate under oath that he has complete authority.
I'm going to say again that no one had the authority to turn him down. They could refuse to partner with him. They could not.
You can use whatever language refuse to partner is turning down.
Well, it's not the same under a well-known Justice Department practice.
Here's why the statute of limitations question is important that Mr. Bishop was getting at just a few minutes ago. Here's why it's important. You let the statute of limitations lapse for 2014, 2015. Those were the years with the felony tax charges where Hunter Biden was getting income from Burisma. Here are 4 facts that I think are so important. Hunter Biden was put on the board of Burisma, made a lot of money, got paid a lot of money over those years, a couple $1 million. He wasn't qualified. Fact number 2, he wasn't qualified to be on the board of Burisma. Not my words, his words. He said he got on the board because of his last name. The brand, as Devin Archer said when he was under oath and we deposed him. Fact number 3, Burisma executives told Hunter Biden, we're under pressure, we need help. Fact number 4, Joe Biden goes to Ukraine, leverages our tax money, American people's tax money, to get the prosecutor fired who was applying the pressure. Interestingly enough, that fact is entirely consistent with what the confidential human source told the FBI, and they recorded in the 1023 form, the same form Mr. Wray didn't want to let this committee and the Congress see. That all happened. That all happened. And what I'm wondering is why you guys let the statute of limitations lapse for those tax years that dealt with Burisma income.
There's one more fact that's important, and that is that this investigation was being conducted by Mr. Weiss, an appointee of President Trump. You will, at the appropriate time, have the opportunity to ask Mr. Weiss that question, and he will no doubt address it in the public report that will be transmitted to the Congress. I don't know the answer to those questions.
Did they forget? Did the lawyers just like let it, did they just like, oh, darn, we let it, were they careless?
I expect that won't be what he says, but because I
You
promised...
know that's not the case, because as Mr. Bishop pointed out, they had a tolling agreement. They talked to Hunter Biden's defense counsel and say, let's extend the statute of limitations. And then at some point, they made an intentional decision to say, we're going to let the statute of limitations lapse. And I want to know who decided that and why they did it.
Mr. Weiss was a supervisor of the investigation at that time and at all times. He made the appropriate decisions, and you'll be able to ask him that question, and he will.
You know why they did it? Everyone knows why they did it. May not say it, but everyone knows why they did it. They didn't. Burisma, those tax years, that dealt with that involved the president. It's one thing to have a gun charge in Delaware. That doesn't involve the president of the United States. But Burisma, oh my, that goes right to the White House. We can't have that. And we can slow walk this thing along. We can even extend the statute of limitations, and then we can intentionally let it lapse. And we know this investigation was slow. Here's what everyone said. Shapley said, DOJ slow walked the investigation. Ziegler, slow walking in the approvals of everything. This happened at the Delaware's attorney's office and DOJ tax level. Mr. Sobocinski, the FBI agent, said, I would have liked to see things move faster. Ms. Hawley said the same. Every witness we've talked to said this thing was slow walked, and we know why. They slow walked it long enough to let the statute of limitations run so they wouldn't have to get into Burisma. Tell me where I'm wrong.
Will the gentleman yield?
No, I'm asking Mr. Garland the
I
question.
think I've tried to make clear that I don't know the specifics of the investigation. Much of what you are describing occurred during the Trump administration, during a Justice Department appointed by President Trump.
No, it didn't. This is 4.5 years, this investigation. We're talking about the last few years. Your statement was just this year, March 1st, to Senator Grassley.
No, I'm sorry. I was trying to respond to your descriptions of what the IRS agents said about certain things.
Statute of limitations is 6 years. That lapsed here in the Biden administration.
On the statute of limitations, we'll say again that the explanation for why the statute of limitation was lapsed, if it was, has to come from Mr. Weiss.
My time is this, but let me ask one last question real quick here. Who decided that David Weiss would stay on as U.S. attorney?
Look, this had occurred before I came. Mr. Weiss had been kept on. I promised the...
No, I didn't say, you can walk all through that. I said, who decided? The White House decided.
Mr. Weiss...
Right? They serve at the pleasure of the president, right?
Mr. Weiss was...
Joe Biden decided to keep David Weiss as U.S. attorney. You weren't sworn in until March. He was told he was going to stay on in February.
Expired.
Pretty fundamental question. Who decided David Weiss was going to stay as U.S. attorney in Delaware?
Mr. Weiss...
Your time has expired.
Chairman, your time has expired.
I'm waiting for an answer, and then I'll yield.
Well, you asked the question after your time had expired already. Point of order.
Gentleman can respond, then I'll go to Ms. Jackson-Lee.
Mr. Weiss was the special U.S. Attorney from the District of Delaware when I came on. He had been appointed by President Trump. I promised that he would be permitted to stay on for this investigation, and that is what happened.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from New York's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I believe you misquoted from the transcript of the Senate hearing. I therefore ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the entire transcript of the Senate hearing.
Without objection, but I didn't misquote what Mr. Garland said. Ms. Jackson. Text.
None of the Republicans' goals today include solving Americans' problems of which they are concerned of. There are many reasons, Mr. Attorney General, that prosecutors decline to bring charges. One of those reasons is that they don't have any evidence for a conviction. That is the justice way. That is just in America. So let me raise these questions and concerns with you today. As we all know, Republicans have repeatedly alleged that the DOJ and FBI are conspiring to shield the Biden family from public criticism and giving Hunter Biden special treatment in its investigations. They have demonized law enforcement officials working with this case at every turn, which has directly led to increased threats against FBI officials, law enforcement, of which they pretend to support. I want to place into the record 2 excerpts from recent transcribed interviews, and I would ask that copies be made available to you. The first is from a June interview with Jennifer Moore, FBI's former Executive Assistant Director for Human Resources. She told this committee that FBI had received so many threats that it had to stand up an entire 10-person unit just to deal with them. She said it is unprecedented. It's a number we have never had before. More testimony, pages 202 to 203. The second excerpt is from an interview earlier this month with Thomas Sobocinski, the special agent in charge of FBI's Baltimore field office. Here's what he said. I joined the FBI 25 years ago. I joined for a reason, to protect the American people, uphold the Constitution. I've been to war. My family's been in bad places. My kids have been evacuated from war zones or quasi-war zones. I've been in some bad things. I have accepted that. I am solely focused on 2 things, and they're not mutually exclusive. The first is, like every investigation, I want to get to a resolution in a fair, apolitical way. The second thing, it's becoming more important and more relevant, is keeping my folks safe. And that part, I've never expected to have to be able to be concerned about keeping families safe, so that for me, this is becoming more and more of a job that I have to do and take away from what I was assigned or signed up to do, which was to investigate and do these things. So when you talk about potential frustrations with communication, I am personally frustrated with anything that places my employees and their families in enhanced danger. Our children, their children did not sign up for this. Mr. Attorney General, do you agree that politically charged rhetoric claiming that law enforcement agents, and I have many questions if you could be brief, are corrupt and contribute to this onslaught of threats against public servants?
Okay, as I said in my opening statement, we have had an astounding number of threats against public servants over the last several years. I think that when career public servants in the Justice Department and in election workers and airline crews, when they are singled out, this can lead to threats of violence and actual violence. We have the actual example of an attack on an FBI office by somebody who was incensed by political rhetoric. This does happen. We must not allow that to happen in this country.
Does the rhetoric regarding the Biden case have any basis in reality?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
Does the rhetoric regarding the Biden case have any basis in reality?
No, it does not.
How does this impact FBI and DOJ employees' ability to do their work? I think you mentioned specifically FBI and DOJ employees.
As I've already said, the agents of the FBI and the prosecutors understand that criticism comes with their job, and they will continue to do their jobs without fear or favor. But the idea of threatening their safety or that of their families is just abhorrent.
Thank you. And I assume that provisions have had to be in place to protect these agents and their families.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
I assume that provisions or protections have had to be in place to protect these agents and their families.
Yes, that's correct.
Let me move on. Thank you very much, General. Let me move on to the fentanyl crisis, and I want to introduce H.R. 4272. But let me just put on the record so that you can probably summarize, and I ask for the indulgence of my chair, but in any event, that the FBI, the DOJ are focused, needlepoint focused, if you will, on the crisis of fentanyl. I want to just raise that for you, and then I just want to follow up with one or two other questions, if you would be able to comment on these collectively. I am dealing with the crisis of human trafficking and the prioritizing of America's children. They are under siege. And the level of child sexual abuse materials generating into human trafficking, and I want to put H.R. 30 on the record, indicates from ICAC that there are 99,000 IP cases where they're enticing children, and maybe only 1% of them being investigated. I'd like your comment on that. And finally, in the approach of of Yom Kippur, to emphasize the work that is hopefully still being doing with anti-Semitism, attacks on immigrants, and African Americans and Latinos. If you would answer those questions, fentanyl, the human trafficking, and then domestic terrorism.
These are all horrendous problems propagated by people who are truly evil. We are fighting the fentanyl scourge in every possible way, starting with the precursors in China, to the labs in Mexico, to the cartels that are bringing the drugs into the United States, to their networks in the United States, to the streets of America. And we will continue to do that with every resource that Congress gives us. Human smuggling and sex trafficking are obviously abhorrent. The Justice Department has task forces on both of these subjects and has brought many, many cases on these subjects. The idea of putting sexually explicit material about children on the web is another area that we are continuing to investigate and to prosecute and to ask the social media to take down from their sites.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman floor is recognized for 5 minutes.
I guess I'm just wondering, Mr. Attorney General, has anyone at the department told President Biden to knock it off with Hunter? I mean, you guys are charging Hunter Biden on some crimes, investigating him on others. You've got the president bringing Hunter Biden around to state dinners. Has anyone told him to knock it off?
Our job in the Justice Department is to pursue our cases without reference to what's happening in the outside world.
Just yes or no. Have you done that?
That is what we do.
So it's a no?
No one that I know of has spoken to the White House about the Hunter Biden case.
I'm wondering then,
of course not.
okay, I got it. So Hunter Biden is selling art to pay for his $15,000 a month rent in Malibu. How can you guarantee that the people buying that art aren't doing so to gain favor with the president?
The job of the Justice Department is to investigate criminal allegations. You have
Are
information.
you investigating this? I mean, someone who bought Hunter Biden's art ended up with a prestigious appointment to a federal position. Doesn't it look weird that he's become this immediate success in the art world as his dad is president of the United States? Isn't that odd?
I'm not going to comment about any specific.
Not going to comment, not going to investigate. So
right.
Hunter Biden associate Devin Archer told us that Hunter sold the appearance of access to then Vice President Biden. Are you confident he has stopped doing that?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Hunter Biden associate Devin Archer told us that Hunter sold the appearance of access to then Vice President Biden. Are you confident he has stopped?
I'm going to say again that all these matters are within the purview with them, and I do
if you were
not.
confident that he had stopped, you could.
And I do
you could
not
probably
intend
tell
to
us
interfere with
he
him.
had. So it was a lot of Chinese money that was working its way through these shell companies into the accounts of the Biden family. So the China initiative was set up during the Trump administration at the Department of Justice to go after the malign influence of the Chinese Communist Party. And the Biden Justice Department dissolved the China initiative. So I guess I'm wondering, does the department have any documents that would detail the basis for why you got rid of the China initiative that President Trump had set up?
The Assistant Attorney General for the National Security Division gave a long speech which explained that. He has testified before Congress several times. We'd be happy to provide you with
What's the basis? Just tell us all now. Why was the China initiative dissolved?
What the Assistant Attorney General said was that we face attacks from 4 China, Russia, and Iran, and that we need to focus our attention on the broad range of these attacks. Sometimes we don't know.
Wait a second. Are you saying that North Korea has the same malign influence risk to the United States as the Chinese Communist Party? Are you trying to represent there's some parity there? Because here's what it looks like. It looks like the Chinese gave all this money to the Bidens, and then you guys came in and got rid of the China initiative, and it was successful. Like, I saw one rationale that you guys got rid of the China initiative because it was racial profiling. But one of the people you convicted was a guy named Charles Lieber, who was a Harvard professor taking $50,000 a month to do China's bidding and give them whatever research was being done. Are you aware of the millions of dollars that moved through Rob Walker's shell companies from Chinese Communist Party entities into Biden family bank accounts? Are you aware of that?
There were a lot of questions that you just asked. Let me start with the first one about North Korea. North Korea is a dangerous actor, both kinetically and with respect to cyber.
But not on par with China. I'm on the Armed Services
Committee,
Committee, Mr.
business
Attorney
right
General.
now of
It makes you look unserious to suggest
May
that.
I answer your question or not?
Answer the question about whether or not you know about all the millions of dollars that
So
moved
you
through
don't
Rob
want me to
Walker's
answer about North Korea?
I already know the answer, and so does everyone. They're not the same risk as China. So let's get on to serious questions and serious answers. Do you know about the money that moved through Rob Walker's shell companies, yes or no?
As I have said repeatedly, I have left these matters to Mr. Weiss. I've not
Blissfully
intruded.
ignorant.
I've not interfered.
Blissfully
I've
ignorant
not
to these
tried to
things.
find out what
It's
he
like
knows.
you're looking the other way on purpose because everybody knows this stuff's happening. And you know what? People don't pay bribes to not get something in return. Right? The China initiative resulted in the convictions of a Harvard professor, of someone at Monsanto. So we were working against the Chinese. They paid the Bidens, and now you're sitting here telling me that North Korea is the big threat. I got to get to this one thing on January 6th. So did the FBI lose count of the number of paid informants on January 6th?
Let me answer your question about China.
I want you to
China
answer this
is the
question. I only
most-
get 5 minutes. You've already sort of, I think,
you asked
screwed
me
the
a
pooch on
question you
China.
haven't
So
permitted.
January 6th, did you lose count of the number of federal assets? Did you lose count and order an audit?
Gentleman's time has expired.
I get an answer to the question of did they lose
No,
count?
let him answer the question.
Time has expired. The Attorney General can respond.
China is the most aggressive, most dangerous adversary that
Attorney
the
General, I think
United
that-
States faces, and we are doing everything to stop that, to prevent their invasions, both kinetic, and through cyberspace, and we will continue to do
If someone
that.
gave that answer in your courtroom when you were a judge, you would tell them they were being
Mr. Chairman,
non-responsive and you would direct them to answer the question.
Point of order, Your Honor.
Time is,
Badgering the witness.
Point of
Time
order,
has
please.
expired.
I got it. I was
You like Your
laughing.
Honor? You want to stick with that?
Yeah, I was getting
Okay.
laughed at you call me Your Honor.
Point of order either way.
Okay, I understand that too.
All right.
But the gentleman asked his question before his time expired. The Attorney General did not respond to the gentleman's question. I was hoping he would respond to the question about the confidential human sources on January 6th. He didn't respond to that. I'm sure we're going to get an answer to that later.
Of course,
Now-
Mr. Chairman.
now
There were
recognize
8
the
questions
gentleman.
before that he was not given a chance to answer.
Understand,
So
but
the witness might have thought.
But the witness doesn't, Mr. Chairman, point of order. The witness does not control the time.
hang on. Exactly right. Members control the time. If they want to switch their question and focus on one more question that they'd like an answer to, I want to give the witness a chance to respond to that final question that Mr. Gaetz asked. He didn't respond to it. Someone else is going to ask it, I'm sure. We now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. I'll just follow up a few of the questions we were asked here. Did Devin Archer not say Joe Biden did nothing wrong?
Be clear, I only know about Mr. Archer from newspaper reports. I want to be clear that I kept my promise to not involve myself in this
Okay,
investigation.
then I'll state it. He said that Joe Biden did nothing wrong. Secondly, did you say that President Trump appointed Weiss, who then you appointed?
Yes, President Trump appointed Mr. Weiss as United States Attorney.
So that should take care of that issue. And they say the department's been weaponized. Wasn't there an investigation of Mr. Gaetz and you didn't prosecute him?
Justice Department does not make comments about its
Well, it
investigation.
shows you we're not weaponized. If we were weaponized, we'd have done it. That was a beautiful exchange there, and it shows we didn't do that. You are the nation's chief law enforcement officer, and I appreciate that. And law enforcement's one of our government's fundamental functions. crime is growing too much in this country and in my city of Memphis as well. We need law enforcement to be effective, swift, and fair. I'd like to focus my question actually affects the American people. Crime. How do we get smarter law enforcement requiring smart resource of allocations, not about funding or less funding, but the right funding for the right programs, and see that that happens? Memphis, as hiring has become more difficult, we've lowered our standards to get more officers. That's not the way to do it. The COPS program is helping us review the policy and procedures, and I thank you, the COPS program, for doing that. But what can Department of Justice do to help see that law enforcement is more efficient and more effective?
So the key to this is our partnership, the FBI, DEA, Marshals, partnership at every local level with local and state law enforcement, in task forces, in discussions to target the most dangerous criminals in those communities, but at the same time to engage the communities to help engender community trust in law enforcement. Everyone who's prosecuted violent crime cases, and that includes me, knows that you need the trust of the community in order to get witnesses. We in the Justice Department are helping our state and local colleagues do just that. The funding you described from the COPS office and in the Office of Justice Programs allows us to give money to state and local police organizations that are having trouble with recruitment and retention and promotion of law officers, and helps them make their departments respectful of constitutional rights, and at the same time effective in the investigation and prosecution of criminal law violations.
Thank you for those activities, those programs through COPS. You've also reinstituted patterns and practices investigations of certain police departments, and Memphis is one of them, and I thank you for doing that. Can you share with us how important those pilot programs are and how they can improve policing?
Yes, Congress has authorized the practice investigations when they have a reasonable belief in that there has been a pattern of unconstitutional behavior in a police department. We are careful to select those cases where we think there is such a pattern. We make those investigations. We then work with the law enforcement agencies in the cities. Our hope is to come to a consent decree that will lead to a better, more efficient, and more constitutional police department. We have been successful in all of our cases to date in reaching consent agreements.
Thank you, sir. You were part of announced bringing of charges, federal charges against the 5 officers who, and I thank you for that. We need that federal charge, and we need our department looked at. If there's a shutdown of the federal government, how will that affect the Department of Justice and affect policing in local communities?
I haven't done a complete calculation on the effects of a shutdown and the difference between which employees are indispensable under the statute and which ones not. It will certainly disrupt all of our normal programs, including our grant programs to state and local law enforcement, and to our ability to conduct our normal efforts with respect to the entire scope of our activities, including helping state and locals fight violent crime.
Thank you, sir, and Happy New Year, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman, Mr. McClintock from California, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Attorney General, looking again at the appointment of Jack Smith and David Weiss, this double standard of justice couldn't be more glaring. Jack Smith was deeply involved in the IRS scandal that targeted conservative political groups to harass. His malicious prosecution of former Governor McDonnell was unanimously overturned by the U.S. Supreme Court. Chief Justice Roberts rebuked Smith directly for attempting to criminalize political activity. You appointed him to prosecute Joe Biden's chief rival for the presidency. And then we have the appointment of David Weiss. Weiss deliberately allowed the statute of limitations to run out on any charges that could have implicated Joe Biden in influence peddling. He originally offered Hunter Biden a sweetheart deal that was ultimately upended by the court. And he's the one you appointed to pursue the charges that could implicate Joe Biden. That leads me to only two explanations, either corruption or incompetence. So which is it?
Those are the kind of questions that judges would rule out of order.
I'm sure you would. Which is it?
Look, I said before, and I will say again, Mr. Weiss was the Republican-appointed United States Attorney appointed by President Trump.
Do you at least see the obvious double standard applied in these two appointments?
Mr. Weiss was a Republican appointee. Mr. Smith is not registered to either party. His entire career was as a career prosecutor.
I'm not asking what their party registrations are. I'm asking about their records and how those records would commend them to the appointments that you made. This is a question of judgment, and it's a question of motive. What was motivating you to do this?
Mr. Smith had a nationwide reputation for integrity and for appropriate prosecution. His work can be measured by what he actually has filed. Everyone in the country can see the indictments.
How can you say that after he was so heavily implicated in the IRS scandal or the rebuke that the Supreme Court gave and many other examples? But let me go on. We've had two IRS whistleblowers inform Congress of attempts by senior Justice Department officials to obstruct a criminal investigation into millions of dollars of ill-gotten and undeclared income to Hunter Biden. They noted several deviations by department officials from normal process that provided preferential treatment, in this case to Hunter Biden, a direct quote, including allowing the statute of limitations to lapse, requesting IRS and FBI management level investigative communications, prohibiting investigators from referring to the big guy or dad in witness interviews, excluding the investigative team from meetings with defense counsel, and notifying defense counsel of pending search warrants. The U.S. Attorney's Office even tipped off the Bidens of an impending search of a storage unit where their records were being kept. Now, that sounds an awful lot like obstruction of justice to me. Was that coming from you or from somebody else?
I'm sorry, I don't was that coming from you? I don't understand the question.
All of the actions that your employees took to obstruct the investigation of Hunter Biden and the earnings that he made and the taxes he failed to declare, their source, and ultimately who they were paid to.
I'm going to say again, with respect to the Hunter Biden investigation, that it has been and still is in the hands of Mr. Weiss, an appointee of President Trump. I don't know about all of these allegations. Some of them appear to have been from the period when the Attorney General appointed by President Trump was still the Attorney General.
Do these charges trouble you at all?
Mr. Weiss will have an opportunity to explain the decisions.
Well, you're the guy in charge. Does this trouble you?
I have intentionally not involved myself in the facts of the case, not because I'm trying to get out of responsibility, but because I'm trying to pursue my responsibility.
Your FBI director testified before this committee of an uptick in, quote, known or suspected terrorists coming across the southern border. And he told us that the southern border represents a massive security threat. Those were his words, a massive security threat. Do you agree?
I am perfectly happy to align myself with the director of the FBI.
Well, why is it then that we, senior administration, rescind the Trump-era orders that had secured that border? I mean, we've seen an exponential increase in suspected terrorists.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The witness can respond if he chooses.
I mean, this is the answer to this question about immigration law is an extremely long answer. I would defer to the Department of Homeland Security, which is responsible for the physical security and about first contact at the border.
Well, we've tried to get answers from him, and he doesn't give them to us, so we're hoping you would. I understand, Mr. Attorney General, you've requested a short break, so we'll take a short break and resume in 5 minutes.
Okay, sorry.
Order. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Garland, great to see you. Thank you for your service to the nation. And the nation watches as the Republicans have no answer for why they want to focus and obsess on Hunter Biden receiving $2 million from Burisma after serving on a board that he said he was not qualified to serve on. But yet, the Saudi Arabians gave $2 billion to Jared Kushner, who conducted Middle East strategy for his dear old dad, Donald Trump. He got $2 billion for something that he is not equipped to do, which is investment banking. And so Republicans looking at Hunter Biden instead of Jared Kushner, Americans don't understand how that could be. And they also are increasingly alarmed about the fact that the Republicans House only objectives. One is to impeach Joe Biden. Number two is to shut down, is to impeach or get rid of Kevin McCarthy, actually. And the third is to shut down government. And a subset of that is to defund the DOJ and the FBI for trying to hold Donald Trump accountable. So the American people are watching that, and they also appreciate the fact that you've had a distinguished career as a prosecutor and a DOJ official, as well as 24 years on the bench. You served on the second highest court of the land as a judge for 24 years, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. We appreciate your service. You were for 7 years the lead. You managed that entire office. We thank you for that. You also served on the Judicial Council for a number of years, and so you are steeped in the rule of law. You are a judge extraordinaire. And as a judge, you never had the occasion to receive a private jet travel to an exotic location by a corporate billionaire, did you? You can cut your mic on.
No.
You never received an offer to get a ride on a private jet?
No.
Did you take any vacations at exclusive resorts paid for by a billionaire?
I know these are not hypothetical questions, and I think this is really
yes
not
no.
within my realm, of course.
No, I mean, you were a judge extraordinaire, and you know the rules of ethics for judges because your bench had to, was covered by a code of conduct. Is that not correct?
Yes, all the judges, federal appellate and district judges are covered by the code of conduct.
You would never have had somebody to pay for your godson's tuition to private school.
And I don't want to answer these kind of hypothetical, at least for me, they're hypothetical questions. What I would say is that I always as a judge, and I've said this before and quite publicly and long ago, always held myself to the highest standards of ethical responsibility imposed by the code, and that's really all I can answer here.
And it's required that judges and justices avoid even appearances of impropriety. Isn't that correct?
Again, I know you're asking this both hypothetically and non-hypothetically. All I can say is I follow the code of judicial conduct, and it includes avoiding appearances. That's
well,
right.
Let me ask you this question. Senator Whitehouse and I sent a letter alerting that we were asking the Judicial Council to refer the matter of Clarence Thomas being in violation of the Ethics in Government Act to the Justice Department. And after that, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, along with myself and others, requested that you take that matter up directly Have you responded to either one of those letters? And if not, why not? And what action have you taken pursuant to those letters?
Gentleman may respond.
I assume that if you sent the letter, we have it, and I'll speak to the Office of Legislative Affairs about where it is at this point.
Is the
The time of the
department investigating?
gentleman has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa.
Thank you. Good day, Mr. Attorney General. And this may be the reason that it's good for you to leave the Chief Justice and that group before each of us speak, because you would have already heard all that. I want to thank you personally for your office and your engagement on Camp Lejeune and on obviously a vast amount of litigation. That is one of the many, many jobs that falls at your feet. One of the jobs that falls at our feet here is that we are watchdogs of the executive branch. You have previously said that you are not Congress's attorney, and you've said you're not the president's attorney. And I'm assuming that you're neither our prosecutor nor our defense attorney, and you are neither the president's prosecutor nor defense attorney. And that's why today's investigation really does deal with the fact that if you're not, by definition, the president's prosecutor, but we have an obligation to see whether or not the president or a member of his family or in concert with the president's activities, in fact, need to be overseen, admonished, or even prosecuted. And so I have a couple of questions for you, and one of them is that you have not said this very much today, but you often say, I cannot comment on that because it's an ongoing investigation. And when we ask for information, you very commonly say that it is the policy, not the law, but the policy of the Department of Justice not to provide information related to an ongoing investigation. So far, I'm on track. Is that correct?
I think I've said more than that's just a policy. I think the letters we've sent trace it to the constitutional separation of powers, to Rule 6E of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, et cetera. But in general, I'm in accord with what you're saying.
So one of the challenges we face is that just a matter of weeks ago, a federal judge found the actions of now special prosecutor to be so outside what he could agree to that he pushed back on a plea settlement and nullified it and sent the U.S. attorney going back. In light of that, don't you think it's appropriate for that portion to be considered a pre-ongoing investigation and for Congress to legitimately look at the activities leading up to that failed plea bargain rather than wait until weeks, months, or years from now a case is fully settled?
Yeah. So if you'll give me a chance, first, I don't agree with the characterization of what happened in the plea. The district judge performed her obligations under Rule 11 to determine whether the parties were in agreement as to what each had agreed to and determined that they were not. Plea fell apart, as you know. And there's been another prosecution. So that leads to the second thing. We are in, Mr. Weiss is in the midst of an ongoing prosecution on the very matter that you're talking about.
Okay, but Mr. Attorney General, if we believe, and we do, at least on this side of the dais, that a pattern of behavior is occurring to the investigation of Hunter Biden, particularly and including, well, he lived in the vice president's home, well, he operated commingled with the vice president, and even today as he travels with the president. So in light of that, can you agree that, in fact, it should be reasonable for us to look at a number of items, including, and one that I want your answer on, and I know we have limited time, Mr. Weiss supposedly had this ability to bring a prosecution anywhere. He now explicitly has that ability. However, are you concerned, and should we have the right to look into the fact that political appointees in California and in the District of Columbia refused to, in fact, cooperate with him in those investigation that he was charged with doing in Delaware, but which flowed over into their jurisdictions? Isn't that, in fact, an example where those political appointees of the now president, that their decision not to cooperate with him creates at least an appearance of political interference with the investigation of the president's son and possibly activities related to the president?
Look, I'm happy to answer this question in hypothetical, but not in the specifics, because I have stayed out of this matter. In the hypothetical, it is the normal process of the department that if a U.S. attorney in one district wants to bring a case in another, they go to that other district and consult. It's perfectly appropriate. They do that in order to determine what the policies are in that district, what the practices have been in that district, what the judges are like in that district. A U.S. attorney in another district does not have the authority to deny another U.S. attorney the ability to go forward, and I have assured Mr. Weiss that he would have the authority one way or the other, and I think Mr. Weiss's letters completely reflect that.
Thank you. To be continued.
Time the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California for 5 minutes.
General and the department with such integrity. We meet today at a momentous time in our history. The country is about to go through a great trial. By this, I do not mean any of the several trials of the former president, but rather a trial of the proposition that we are a nation of laws, committed to the rule of law, and that no one is above the law. It is a proposition well known around the world because it is the one essential ingredient in all democracies. We have all professed our belief in this principle, but it has never been truly tested, not like it is today. In this committee, we are engaged in a portion of that trial. The chairman would abuse the power of this committee by trying to interfere in the prosecutions of Donald Trump, by trying to use the committee's power of subpoena to compel criminal discovery, in effect, making the committee a kind of criminal defense firm for the former president. In doing so, the chairman of this committee would establish a very different proposition. Through Mr. Jordan's actions, he would establish the principle that the rule of law should apply to almost everyone, just not the leader of his party. According to this alternate proposition, if you are the President of the United States and you lose your re-election, you can violate the law and Constitution to try to stay in power, and if you are successful, well then maybe you get to be president for life. And if you fail, there is no repercussion. This proposition is also well known to the world, and it is called dictatorship. Mr. Jordan hopes to camouflage his assault on the rule of law by falsely claiming that Donald Trump is the victim of unequal justice and Hunter Biden its beneficiary. It is a claim as transparently political as it is devoid of any factual basis. And it is cynical, based on the belief that the American people cannot discern fact from fiction. But I am betting on America. History has shown that those who bet against her are rarely successful, and more often they end up covered with shame. I believe in the rule of law, and I thank you, Mr. Attorney General, for defending it. Let me now turn to some of the false claims asserted by the former president and some on this committee. On Sunday, the former president appeared on a national news Sunday program and was asked about 4 indictments and 91 counts facing him. His response was, Biden indictments. Excuse me, Biden political indictments. He said to the Attorney General, indict him. Mr. Attorney General, I want to give you a chance to respond. Was the president telling the truth, or was he lying when he said that President Biden told you to indict him?
No one has told me to indict, and in this case, the decision to indict was made by the special counsel.
So that statement the president made on Sunday was false?
I'm just going to say again that no one has told me who should be indicted in any matter like this, and the decision about indictment was made by Mr. Smith.
Let me ask you this question about the prosecution of Hunter Biden. The prosecutor in that case, Mr. Weiss, was appointed not by Joe Biden, but he was appointed in the first instance by Donald Trump. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And he was continued in that position, was he not?
He was continued in that position, yes.
And Mr. Attorney General, can you imagine the hue and cry you would hear from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle if you had removed him from that position? Can you imagine the claims that you had removed a prosecutor who was diligently investigating Hunter Biden? Can you imagine the outrage they would have expressed?
I can say that during my confirmation hearing, I discussed with many senators on that side of the aisle their desire and actual insistence that Mr. Weiss be continued to have responsibility for that matter. And I promised, and I said at my confirmation hearing, that he would be permitted to stay and that I would not interfere.
And Mr. Attorney General, that was exactly the right decision. That was the right decision to give the American people the confidence that even a prosecutor chosen by the former president would continue in the investigation into the son of the current president. That was exactly the right decision. Exactly the right decision. And my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would have been screaming if it were otherwise. But their attack on you is completely devoid of fact, of principle. But I appreciate you doing the right thing for the Department of Justice and, more importantly, the right thing for the American people. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky.
Attorney General Garland, Elon Musk was a Democrat who admittedly supported Biden, but then he became a critic of the administration and exposed the censorship regime. Now, per public reports, the DOJ has opened not one but two investigations of Elon Musk. Mark Zuckerberg, on the other hand, spent $400 million in 2020 tilting the elections secretly for Democrats. No investigations whatsoever. To the American public, these look like mafia tactics. You pays your money, we look the other way. You get in our way, we punish you. The American public sees what these tactics are. Now I want to direct your attention to a video here that we're going to play.
Obviously, that's a significant matter. It is an ongoing criminal investigation, and so I'm not going to comment on an ongoing criminal investigation.
Were those pipe bombs operable?
Again,
The ATF is the expert.
Again, it's an ongoing criminal investigation, and under longstanding policy, I cannot comment.
As you know, this is a very active, ongoing investigation, and there are some restrictions on that, but we will do
we
our
can
best
handle
to respond.
classified information, and we fund your department, and so you need to provide that.
It's not, respectfully, it's not an issue of classification. It's an issue of commenting on ongoing criminal investigations, which is something that by longstanding department policy we are restricted in doing. And in fact, the last administration actually strengthened those policies partly
That's
because—
not our policy, though, and we fund you, so let's move on. Do you know how—
So I'm not going to violate this norm of the rule of law. I'm not going to comment on an investigation that's ongoing.
Peter Navarro was indicted for contempt of Congress. Aren't you, in fact, in contempt of Congress when you give us this answer? This is an answer that's appropriate at a press conference. It's not an answer that's appropriate when we are asking questions. We are the committee that is responsible for your creation, for your existence of your department. You cannot continue to give us these answers. Aren't you, in fact, in contempt of Congress when you refuse to answer?
Congressman, I have the greatest respect for Congress. I also have the greatest respect for the Constitution and laws of the United States. The protection of pending investigations and ongoing investigations, as I briefly discussed in another dialogue a few moments ago, goes back to the separation of powers, which gives to the executive branch the sole authority to conduct prosecutions. It's a requirement of due process and respect for those who are under investigation, the protection of their civil rights.
Well, with all due respect to that, Iran-Contra was an ongoing investigation, and that didn't stop Congress from getting the answers. And you're getting in the way of our constitutional duty. You're citing the Constitution. I'm going to cite it. It's our constitutional duty to do oversight. Now, in that video, that was your answer to a question to me 2 years ago when I said how many agents or assets of the government were present on January 5th and January 6th and agitating in the crowd to go into the Capitol and how many went into the Capitol. Can you answer that now?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Oh, last time you don't know how many there were or there were none?
I don't know the answer to either of those questions. If there were any, I don't know how many. I don't know whether there are any.
I think you may have just perjured yourself that you don't know that there were any. You want to say that again, that you don't know that there were any?
I have no personal knowledge of this matter. I think what I said the last time.
You've had 2 years to find out. And the day, by the way, that was in reference to Ray Epps, and yesterday you indicted him. Isn't that a wonderful coincidence? On a misdemeanor. Meanwhile, you're sending grandmas to prison. You're putting people away for 20 years for merely filming. Some people weren't even there yet. You got the guy on video who's saying go into the Capitol. He's directing people to the Capitol before the speech ends. He's at the site of the first breach. You've got all the goods on him, 10 videos, and it's an indictment for a misdemeanor? The American public isn't buying it. I yield the balance of my time to Chairman Jordan.
May I answer the question?
I'm going to ask you one now. We'll let the gentleman.
Yeah.
Go ahead, but
in discovery, in the cases that were filed with respect to January 6, the Justice Department prosecutors provided whatever information they had about the question that you're asking. With respect to Mr. Epps, the FBI has said that he was not an employee or informant of the FBI. Mr. Epps has been charged, and there's a proceeding, I believe, going on today on that subject.
the charge is a joke. I yield to the Chairman.
The time the gentleman has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Mr. Attorney General, my colleague just said that you should be held in contempt of Congress, and that is quite rich, because the guy who's leaving the hearing room right now, Mr. Jordan, is about 500 days into evading his subpoena. About 500 days. So if we're going to talk about contempt of Congress, let's get real. I mean, are you serious that Jim Jordan, a witness to one of the greatest crimes ever committed in America, a crime where more prosecutions have occurred than any crime committed in America, refuses to help his country, and we're going to get lectured about subpoena compliance and contempt of Congress? Jim Jordan won't even honor a lawful subpoena? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Mr. Attorney General, you are serious, they are not. You are decent, they are not. You are fair, they are not. So I welcome you to the law firm of Insurrection LLP, where they work every single day on behalf of one client, Donald Trump. And they do that at the expense of millions of Americans who need the government to stay open, who want their kids safe in their schools, and would like to see Ukraine stay in the fight so that we don't help Russia. That's the expense that this nonsense, this clown show, I'd call it a clown show, except they actually have real responsibilities that affect real Americans. It's the difference between one side that believes in governing and one side that believes in ruling. You've tried to comply with this committee. In fact, last week, one of your special agents came here for an interview, brought his lawyer, and was told that he couldn't have his lawyer present. Mr. Jordan, who tells all of us he knows so much about the Constitution, wouldn't afford one of your employees one of the basic constitutional rights to have a lawyer present. In fact, they threatened to call the Capitol Police and arrest a lawyer that was brought. Are you familiar with that standoff that occurred last week, Mr. Attorney General?
Generally, yes.
Well, your office also sent a letter detailing it, that you were willing to comply, but you'd like him to have a lawyer, and I'd like to submit that to the record with unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Who appointed Mr. Weiss?
Well, Mr. Trump was the last person who appointed Mr. Weiss to the position of U.S. Attorney. I appointed him to the position of Special Counsel last. Mr. Durham was, I believe, also appointed by President Trump, and Mr. Barr appointed him as Special Counsel.
And again, these guys are so upset that Donald Trump's appointed prosecutors aren't doing enough of the corruption that Donald Trump wants them to do. So either they are just following the law, or they're not as corrupt, and they're not willing to go as far as they think that Donald Trump deserves. That's what they're asking to happen here. Also, doesn't it seem that they want it both ways when it comes to the special counsel? A lot of questions suggested that the special counsel should be independent, but when they didn't like the direction of the special counsel, you were asked why you didn't interfere more or involve yourself more or investigate more. Did you get that sense that you're kind of stuck here?
When I make an appointment, somebody be special counsel or prosecutor, the appointment is without respect to what the outcomes of the case will be.
Your office has made a number of reforms to 702, targeting foreign nationals, but those reforms have not been put into law. 702 is also one of the best weapons we have to go after fentanyl. Can you tell us if you would support putting some of those reforms into law so we don't have to live administration to administration to see if they're going to be followed?
I would. Section 702 provides us with the greatest amount, at least the Justice Department, every morning, the greatest amount of intelligence that we receive about dangerous threats to the United States.
From foreign nationals? From
foreign nationals. I am quite aware and sensitive to civil liberties concerns with respect to the queries. And for that reason, I put into place and I extended some of those that Mr. Barr had begun at the end of his term, and I put further ones in place. Those have led to a dramatic reduction in the number of queries and a dramatic reduction in the number of non-compliant queries. I believe those are appropriate reforms, and I would be in favor of codifying them, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General, and thank you for coming and doing something that the chairman is unwilling to do. Testify to Congress. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Attorney General, on August 11, 2023, you appointed Mr. David Weiss, U.S. Attorney for the District of Delaware, as special counsel to oversee the investigation of Hunter Biden. I don't think the question has been asked yet. Why did you choose to appoint him as special counsel?
The explanation was given, and as far and to the extent I can give I'm permitted to give an explanation, is the one I gave and sent to the Congress, which is that Mr. White, that I had promised to give him all the resources that he need, that he had reached the stage of the investigation where he thought it would be appropriate. And under those extraordinary circumstances, I thought the public interest would be served by making him special counsel.
How did Mr. Weiss's name emerge? Who recommended him? How was it brought to you or presented to you that this would?
No, I'm not going to get into internal discussions. Mr. Weiss asked that he be appointed as special counsel, and I granted that request and made him special counsel, but I'm not going to get into internal deliberations in the Justice Department.
But I think you said earlier you've had no discussions with the White House and certainly the president in regards to that. Is that accurate?
No, of course.
There were no suggestions that came from any other level of government on Mr.
Nothing came from the White House, that's right.
So on August 20th, 2023, the Washington Post article claimed that Mr. Weiss worked with Hunter Biden and Hunter Biden's late brother, Beau Biden. Were you aware that there was a relationship there with the Biden family?
I'm not familiar with this. I don't know when he did what.
They worked together on legal cases in prior years. You were unaware of this?
I'm not familiar with that.
And the article claims it would have been inevitable for Mr. Weiss and the president to cross paths in a state like Delaware. They knew each other. There was a relationship there, but you were unaware of any of this before you appointed him?
I'm unaware of this, but attorneys who are in practice certainly get to know people. So it's very difficult anywhere in the country for attorneys not to get to know attorneys on other sides of matters.
You've said previously that Mr. Weiss had the ultimate authority over the investigation of the president's son, including prior to his appointment as special counsel. And you stand by that statement, I'm sure?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Just that in fact, there was that the ultimate authority was still there with Mr. Weiss to make determinations on that case.
You mean still as special counsel? Yes.
Yes, as special counsel. So the buck stopped there, and that's been determined. According to whistleblower testimony, Mr. Weiss' deputy, AUSA Leslie Wolf, objected to search warrants of President Biden's guest house, denied investigation access to a storage unit containing all the documents from the vacated office of law firm. Is Leslie Wolf still employed by the Department of Justice?
I'm not going to talk about any individuals in the Justice Department. As I said before, singling out individuals has led to serious threats to their safety. I will say that the supervisor of this investigation was Mr. Weiss. He's responsible for all the decisions that were made. Excuse me. Many of the things that you're saying occurred during the previous administration. I apologize.
Okay, well, there was absolutely a discussion by Leslie Wolf that if they told investigators or got involved with this, that there would ultimately be issues. You still believe that at this point that the entire investigation has moved in the correct discretion, was handled by the correct discretion of the individuals involved?
Mr. Weiss was a long-standing career prosecutor who was appointed by President Trump. He has an outstanding reputation, and I have confidence that he will proceed as appropriate. And at the end of his investigation, he will submit a public report, just like Mr. Durham, just like Mr. Mueller. He will be available for you to ask him questions about why he did various things that were done.
I yield the balance of my time to the chairman.
Mr. Garland, what changed? On July 10th, 2023, David Weiss wrote Senator Graham and said, I have not requested special counsel designation. August 11th, you announced that he's now the special counsel. What happened in that 31 days?
As I said publicly, several days before my announcement, I think 3 days, Mr. Weiss had asked to become special counsel. He explained that he had reached the stage of his investigation where he thought that appropriate.
What stage is that?
I had promised to give him the resources he needed.
What stage is that? He'd reached the stage. After 5 years, what stage are we in? We in the beginning stage, the middle stage, the end stage, the keep hiding the ball stage? What stage are we in?
I think this one I would go back to the videotape where I said I'm not permitted to discuss ongoing investigation.
Well, isn't that convenient? Something changed in 31 to 32 days from July 10th to August 11th. I think it's too brave. Whistleblowers came forward and a judge called BS on the plea deal. You guys tried to get past them. That's what I think happened. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The House Judiciary Committee has the responsibility of helping to ensure the rule of law. Unfortunately, this committee's chairman ignored a bipartisan congressional subpoena. The horrible precedent set by this chairman has damaged the credibility of all congressional committees in seeking information from witnesses and damaged the rule of law. Attorney General Garland, thank you for your public service, and thank you for being here today. I'd like to start by showing a video of January 6th, and then I'm going to ask you some questions about that day.
Hey, brother, we're boots on the ground here. We're moving on to Capitol now. I'll give you a boots on the ground update here in a few.
Multiple capital entries! Multiple capital entries! We're still taking metal, sharpened objects, missiles to include bottles and rocks, and hand-thrown chemical-grade fireworks. This is now effectively a riot.
1349 hours declaring it a riot.
Attorney General Garland, the Department of Justice charged over 1,100 defendants in connection with the attack on our Capitol, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I'm going to state two facts. The people who shot the Capitol were supporters of Donald Trump. They attacked the Capitol to stop Congress from certifying the fact that Donald Trump lost the election. Those two facts were so horrible that some in the right-wing media and some Republican members of Congress could not handle that, so they made up conspiracy theories. In fact, Donald Trump called January 6th a beautiful day. He said the people who showed up had love in their hearts. The Republican member of Congress said January 6th was like a normal tourist visit, and some Republicans have said there were no weapons used on January 6th. Attorney General Garland, were there weapons used in the attack on January 6th?
Yes, in the video you already saw some of the weapons that were used, and there are obviously many more, many hours of video.
Another conspiracy theory is that somehow the FBI actually orchestrated this attack. So I'm going to go through some cases that have gone through completion and resulted in sentencing. Joe Biggs was sentenced to 17 years in prison for seditious conspiracy and other counts related to attack on our nation's capital. Have you seen evidence that Joe was an FBI agent?
No.
In fact, Joe Biggs was a member of the Proud Boys. This is what Assistant U.S. Attorney Connor Monroe stated about Joe Biggs and the Proud Boys in court. He stated, quote, "They saw themselves as Donald Trump's army, fighting to keep their preferred leader in power no matter what the law or the courts had to say about it." And on September 4th, Joe Biggs stated that he is confident Trump will pardon him. He said, quote, "Oh, I know he'll pardon us. We're his supporters. We went there like he asked." I'd like to now ask you about the case of Stewart Rhodes, who was sentenced to 18 years in prison for the attack on our nation's capital. Have you seen any shred of evidence that Stewart Rhodes was an FBI agent?
No.
In fact, he was the founder of the Oath Keepers, a far-right paramilitary organization. Rhodes asked Donald Trump to call them up as militia. And then I'd like to ask you about Enrique Tarrio, who was sentenced to 22 years in the attack on our nation's capital. Have you seen any evidence that Enrique Tarrio was an FBI agent?
He was not an FBI agent.
In fact, he was the leader of the Proud Boys. What happened on January 6th is that Donald Trump's supporters showed up because he told them to. They marched to the Capitol because he told them to. They attacked the Capitol because he told them to stop the steal. That is the truth, and that is how history is going to record it. Thank you for prosecuting those who attacked our nation's capital. I yield back.
Back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a slide up here, and I'll start. In October or March of 22, Mr. Weiss was denied the ability to bring charges against Hunter Biden in the District of Columbia. In April of that same year, you testified before the Senate Appropriations Committee that Mr. Weiss was free to run the investigation without interference from the DOJ. According to the IRS whistleblower, there was a meeting in October of 22 where Mr. Weiss said that he was not the deciding official on whether charges were filed. And we know that because we have handwritten notes from the IRS whistleblowers that was confirmed in an email to people in the meeting. Later in January, Mr. Weiss was denied the ability to bring charges again against Hunter Biden in the Central District of California. You testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee in March of this year that he had full authority. That Weiss confirmed that to us in a letter in June, that he had been granted, quote, full authority over this matter. But then he kind of backed up. In June 30th, he said, well, just kidding. My charging authority is geographically limited to my home district in Delaware. And of course, you appoint him as special counsel. So why the heck has his story changed so many times over the course of these investigations?
Congressman, I've seen all of the 3 letters. I've read them quite carefully. They are all consistent with each other, and I urge everyone watching this on television or anyone who's interested to look at those 3 letters. They are not inconsistent with each other, and there's no change in the story.
So, but you agree that he had, and you've said this publicly, that he had ultimate authority prior to the appointment of special counsel?
I've explained this repeatedly here. I've explained this in another proceeding. I said that Mr. Weiss would have the authority to bring a case in any jurisdiction in which he wanted to, and Mr. Weiss has confirmed that he would have that authority. I explained that if he had to bring a case in another jurisdiction, as a matter of mechanics, it would require me me or a delegatee of mine to sign a 515 order. That is very common.
But Mr. Attorney General,
there was nothing stopping that from happening.
Forgive me for a second, though, but that's When you say you have ultimate, when he wrote a letter on your behalf in June, I have ultimate authority. This is prior to the designation of special counsel. Ultimate to me means like that you can go wherever you want to.
Ultimate means
at,
when
at that particular point, sir, could he file charges in the District of South Carolina? He would not have that ability, correct? He would have to go through that U.S. attorney. So that's not full authority.
All he would have to do is ask me for 515 authority, and I would sign it right away, just like when he asked me to be special counsel. Within 3 days, I signed that.
So he didn't have ultimate authority.
He had the authority because I promised that he would have the authority.
But he did not have that authority. See, here's where I'm going. If he was denied the ability to bring charges in March of 22 in the District of Columbia, if he was denied the ability to bring charges in January of 23 in the Central District of California, that's not full authority. These U.S. attorneys operate as gatekeepers, so that's not full authority to do much of anything. And you know what's remarkable to me? We sit here and we look at this, and his story has changed so many times. You know whose story hasn't changed? Mr. Shapley, Mr. Ziegler, the emails that confirm that he said, I'm not the deciding person on whether charges are filed. And you know what the response back was from his colleague at work? Yep, you covered it all, Gary. That is consistent. What Mr. Weiss has done is this shell game and saying that he has authority, he doesn't have authority, but these gatekeepers at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia and in the Central District of California, they would have the gatekeeping authority on whether charges are brought in their jurisdictions.
I'm sorry,
absent that designation, correct?
Those words have no meaning, gatekeepers, etc. Mr. Weiss said he was never denied authority. I'm the one with the authority to decide who can prosecute in a different jurisdiction, and I promised that he would have that authority. I do not see any inconsistency here. I was not at the meeting that Mr. Shapley was referring to. I know what I guaranteed, and I know what Mr. Weiss has said I guaranteed.
Mr. Chairman, I yield the balance of my time.
It's a simple question. If he already had it, why does he need it? That's the question. You said in your statement on August 11th, you said he will continue to have the authority to bring charges where, when, and wherever he decides. So how can he continue to have a power that you just gave him? That's the fundamental question the gentleman from South Carolina was asking. If he already had it, why does he need it?
And I tried to answer that he had the authority, and he continued to have
When
the
did he
authority.
specifically ask you, did you tell him ahead of time that he could get 515 status anytime? When did you tell him that he could get that if he requested it?
I made absolutely clear.
When? Did you tell him at the start of the
I made
investigation?
clear from the beginning in my statements to the Senate that he would have the authority to make any decisions that he wanted to and bring prosecutions he thought were appropriate.
The time the gentleman from South Carolina has expired. The gentlelady from Washington is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Garland, thank you for your tremendous service to this country. As somebody who was trapped in the gallery on January 6th, I have to admit it's still hard for me to look at that video and imagine that that happened at our U.S. Capitol. And I'm deeply grateful that you have led this nation towards accountability of all those who were involved, including the former president. You have done so with full and complete attention to the facts, with a team around you that focuses on thorough investigation, and with a very clear mission that you've stated over and over and over again, despite the asked and answered on the other side, that the Justice Department works for the American people. This is a night and day transformation from a Justice Department that was constantly used by Donald Trump for his own political gain. And it is my firm belief that we have to hold those accountable who tried to destroy our country, including the former president, or we risk losing our country altogether. So I thank you for your steadfast leadership. It is just sad that this committee has also been transformed into a soapbox for political conspiracy theorists, instead of focusing on the really important issues that the American people care about. And so that's what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to focus on the critical crisis of reproductive freedom and the efforts to try and strip reproductive freedom from people across this country. As you know, a decades-long project of the extreme right wing materialized last year when 5 Republican-appointed justices overturned 50 years of precedent that established the constitutional right to abortion. As one of the 1 in 4 women across this country who has had an abortion, and who felt compelled to share my story after decades because I saw the attacks on the right to abortion and what it would do particularly for poor women, for Black and brown and indigenous people across this country, I spoke out and shared that story. In the 22 states where Republicans control the state legislature and governorship today, all have moved to restrict reproductive rights. More than 25 million women of childbearing age now live in states where abortion access has been curtailed. And in Washington state, my home state, the Seattle Times reported that we are seeing increasing numbers of abortion patients, not only from neighboring Idaho, which we knew we would see, but also from other southern states where these restrictions are enforced. Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to enter this Seattle Times article into the record. She traveled 2,000 miles secretly for her Washington abortion. Why patients from the South are coming here.
Without objection.
As our fundamental freedoms are threatened by extreme MAGA Republicans in Congress and across the country, we trust that the DOJ will initiate investigations and file lawsuits to protect reproductive rights. With respect to mifepristone, what has the department done to protect access to this very safe abortion drug that women can take at home safely and to end a pregnancy?
So the FDA authorized the use of mifepristone as safe and effective, and it did it back in 2000. That's been challenged, first in a district court when we defended the FDA in that matter. There was an appeal in to the circuit court, which narrowed the district court's opinion in some ways, but allowed it to go forward in other. We have filed a cert petition, which has been granted, I think, in the Supreme Court of the United States.
Very, very important work. Thank you. My home state of Washington has one of the highest rates of religiously affiliated hospitals in the country, with our state's insurance commissioner's office reporting that in 2021, there were several counties lacking even one secular hospital. This is an issue under the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act when patients in need of abortion care as a life-saving treatment are denied services under the hospital's policies. What is the department doing to enforce this law mandating that every hospital that receives Medicare funds provide, quote, necessary stabilizing treatment to patients, including abortion care?
You're right. This is a federal law. It expressly preempts any inconsistent state law. For that reason, we filed a lawsuit in Idaho and one in the district court with that impinged on the rights granted under EMTALA. We have filed, I think, a number of statements of interest in other places, and we're continuing to look at where it would be appropriate to intervene.
Thank you. You're on record stating that women who reside in states banned reproductive care free to seek that care in states where it is legal. I thank you for that. Can you briefly discuss the progress made by the task force and DOJ to ensure that pregnant people retain their right to travel?
Yes, look, my view about this right to travel is the same as Justice Kavanaugh's in his separate opinion. He said, this is not a particularly difficult question. The right to travel is a constitutional right, and it allows a woman in a state that bars abortion to travel and obtain an abortion in a state in which it's permitted.
Thank you, Attorney General, for your commitment to this issue and to upholding the rule of law in our country. Appreciate your service.
Time and delay has expired. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Attorney General, for being here today. I would like to go back briefly to your remarks regarding before the Senate when you were confirmed and your promise regarding Mr. Weiss. Can you explain to us in a little more detail who you promised that you would keep Mr. Weiss on this case? To whom was that promise made?
Yeah, so a number of senators in my meetings with them asked me to make that promise. I think that was discussed in my interchange with a senator from Tennessee, I believe.
And did that promise that you made lead you to believe that even if that Mr. Weiss displayed a level of incompetence, that you would be precluded from asking him to step down or precluded from replacing him?
Look, when someone asks me to make this appointment, they didn't ask me depending upon what the outcome was. Mr. Weiss has made his appointment, decisions, and Mr. Weiss is an experienced federal prosecutor with extensive experience and with sufficient credibility to be appointed by President Trump. I just have no grounds for interfering here.
Right, so you haven't answered the question. The question was really what level of incompetence displayed by a prosecutor under your control would it take for you to make a change? But let's move on. The level of incompetence I'm referring to, I'll just read this to you. This is the same Weiss who headed an investigation that was trashed by whistleblowers who alleged that his investigation had been fixed from the outset. It's the same Weiss who ran an investigation in which agents were allegedly prevented from asking about Joe Biden, obstructed in their efforts to pursue questions, compromised by tip-offs to the Biden team on planned searches. It was the same Weiss who reportedly allowed the statute of limitations to run out on Hunter's major tax offenses, even though he had the option to extend it. It was the same Weiss who did not indict on major tax felonies and cut a plea deal that brushed aside a felony gun charge. It was the same Weiss who inked a widely panned sweetheart deal that caused a federal judge to balk it and trash a sweeping immunity grant, language that even the prosecutor admitted never been seen in a previous plea deal. So there's a list of what I would suggest under many people's definition would be incompetence. Are you saying that that's inadequate for you to have questioned what he was doing?
I'm saying that all of these are allegations. I don't know what the facts of them are. I have, as I've explained, stayed out of this investigation. I was not present at any of the meetings discussed. Some of the meetings occurred under the previous administration, where Mr. Weiss was assigned to the matter by the previous Justice Department, and I'm not in a position to comment on them.
That's too bad. Is that there's a scope of investigation memo generally issued when we start these things out. Who issued that scope of investigation memo to Mr. Weiss? Was it done back on when he was originally appointed to take on the Biden case? Is that when the memo was telling him what he was supposed to do was issued? Is there a scope of investigation memo is my question.
There's a scope of investigation with respect to special counsel, and that has been publicly transmitted to the chairman of this Judiciary Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee.
And who wrote it?
Who wrote that scope?
Yeah. Who decided what should be within the scope of that investigation?
I'm sorry?
Who wrote the memo? Who decided what the scope of that?
I decided what should be in the scope. If you'll compare that to the scope of many other special counsels, it basically is modeled on the format that we've used in the past, not only in this administration, but the previous one.
In your remarks delivered on August 11th of this year concerning the appointment of David Weiss as special counsel, you say, upon considering his request, as well as, quote, the extraordinary circumstances relating to this matter, end quote. Can you tell us what those extraordinary circumstances were?
I'm sorry.
Okay, so these are your remarks back on August 11th.
Yes.
And it says, on Tuesday of this week, Mr. Weiss advised me that, I'm just quoting your judgment, his investigation has reached a stage at which he should continue his work as special counsel, and he asked to be so appointed. Upon considering his request, as well as, quote, the extraordinary circumstances related to this matter, end quote, I've concluded it's in the best public interest to appoint him special counsel. What were those extraordinary circumstances you're talking about?
Yeah, look, all of these special counsels, including the appointment by Mr. Barr with respect to Mr. Durham, uses those phrases. The reason he uses those phrases is because that's in the special counsel regulation. I've said as much as I can say with respect to that without discussing matters relating to a pending investigation. I can't discuss matters with respect to a pending investigation for the reasons I've said.
Thank you. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Garland, I want to welcome you today to this hearing. Want to turn our attention to something very interesting, more important. The most important thing on Main Street today in my district is drug addiction, narcotics, trafficking, fentanyl. I'm going to quote you, June 23rd of this year. You said, and I open quote, the U.S. government continues to do everything in our power to disrupt fentanyl trafficking and to prevent more of our communities from being devastated by the fentanyl epidemic. He went on to say, we are targeting every step of the movement, manufacturing, and the sale of fentanyl from start to finish. Mr. Garland, I believe that the only thing that cartel leaders fear is a United States prison. I want to thank you for the good job. You recently extradited Oviedo Guzman Lopez, El Chapo's son. Thank you very much for that good job. My question is, do you have plans to extradite additional cartel leaders from other parts of the world to the United States to face U.S. justice and a U.S. prison sentence?
Yeah, I don't want to get into discussions, diplomatic discussions over the matter, but obviously we have indicted the other Chapitos, Chapito being the nickname given to the sons of El Chapo.
How many of those? How many are there of those?
Trying to remember, I think there are maybe 4 more, maybe 5, I'm not sure exactly. But they've all been publicly indicted, and of course we will seek the extradition of it and the apprehension of everyone we've indicted.
The apprehension, the indictment of these individuals requires that you have cooperation from foreign countries, especially Mexico, since that's where a lot of these cartels are operating. Would you say right now Mexico is cooperating with us in terms of working with your office to bring these cartel leaders to justice?
They've obviously worked with us with respect to Ovidio. His apprehension by the Mexicans led to the deaths of a significant number of Mexican Marines. Ovidio's people fighting back with 50 caliber machine guns, and the Marines having to use Black Hawk attack helicopters in order to arrest him.
Are these U.S. Marines or Mexican?
I'm sorry?
Marines? United States Marines?
No, I'm sorry, Mexican Marines. It's the Mexican Marines who are playing an important role in the apprehension of the cartel leaders.
So, Mr. Garland, would you characterize cooperation right now with Mexicans as being good?
Look,
Not good?
I would say cooperation can always be better. We have an enormous problem with respect to fentanyl coming from Mexico, from its manufacture there, based on the precursors coming from China, based on the cartel leaders.
How can we as members of Congress help you make sure that other countries have stronger cooperating relationship with us? How can we make sure that they cooperate to their fullest abilities with you?
I appreciate that request. I'll have to think about it some more. I will say that I've personally traveled to Mexico twice to try to get cooperation with respect to these matters.
How important is FISA and 702 to your job when it comes to fighting narco fentanyl?
It's very important. Fentanyl poses a national security problem for the United States.
So can you work with us to assure that we put guardrails put guardrails, safety measures on 702 to assure that those investigative weapons are not turned against U.S. citizens?
Absolutely. 702 is a crucial, essential tool, but like all tools, it has to be properly controlled. And we would be happy to work with Congress to make sure the civil liberties are protected.
My last minute, I wanted to turn to the antitrust area, the European Union, and the Digital Marketing Act, which is this Digital Markets Act, which is designed to protect consumers in Europe. Yet, it looks like most of their focus is on American firms. No European companies or other foreign operators in the European Union are being targeted. It looks like it's only American firms operating in Europe. And it looks like the DOJ is working to support the efforts of the Europeans in implementing the Digital Marketing Act. I have 18 seconds. I'm going to submit a written question to your office. But my focus, my interest is making sure American jobs, American companies are successful around the globe and that they are not in any way hampered from working overseas. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I ran out of time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 5 minutes. Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Attorney General. You know, following your confirmation, Americans were promised they were getting a focused, nonpartisan to lead their federal law enforcement. I had my doubts back then. And the last 2 years have more than confirmed in my mind those fears. Never in my life would I have thought that I would see such a politicized, DOJ. Never in my life would I have thought I would see such a Department of Justice that didn't obey their own rules. Never in my life did I think I would see the egregious investigations conducted under your watch, or the blatant disregard of the First Amendment by FBI field offices under your watch. And never in my life did I think I would see our great DOJ turn into a politicized weapon to be wielded by an investigation to attack political rivals. I still hold the thousands of hardworking staff with high regard, but unfortunately there are some within the department, in my mind, who have betrayed their oaths. And for that, you must be held accountable. I hold you accountable for the labeling of parents as domestic terrorists standing up for their proper education of their own children. I hold you accountable for the anti-Catholic memo. Imagine sending agents undercover into Roman Catholic churches because they were supposedly domestic terrorists. And I hold you accountable for unleashing a special counsel with a history of botched investigations on our current president's political rival. The department under your leadership, I am sorry to say, and I am sorry to say, has become an enforcement arm of the Democratic National Committee. If there is a perceived threat to the Democratic Party, this DOJ attacks every single time. But when there are actionable threats against conservatives, this DOJ stays put. Violent protesters outside the Supreme Court justice's home, unpunished. Attacks on pro-life centers, unpunished. The two-tiered system of justice is clear, and it's clear to the American public. And the buck stops with the man in charge. That man is you. The actions of the DOJ are on you. The decline of Americans' trust in our federal law enforcement is on you. The political weaponization of the DOJ is on you. Attorney General, I need a simple yes or no to the following. Just yes or no, because we don't have much time. Do you agree that traditional Catholics are violent extremists? Yes or no?
Let me answer what you've said in that long list of statements, and I'll be happy to answer all of those.
Attorney General, I control the time. I'm going to ask you to answer the questions I asked.
You controlled time by asking me a substantial number of things. And
I didn't ask you those things. I made a statement. Attorney General, through the chair, I ask you, do you agree that traditional Catholics are violent extremists?
I have no idea what the traditional means here.
Catholics that go to church.
May I answer your question?
Yes or no?
The idea that someone with my family background would discriminate against any religion is so outrageous, so absurd.
Mr. Attorney General, it was your FBI that did this. It was your FBI that was sending, and we have the memos, we have the emails, we're sending undercover agents into Catholic churches.
Both I and the director of the FBI have said that we were appalled. Have said that we were appalled by that memo.
So then you agree that they're not extremists?
We were appalled by that memo.
Are they extremists or not, Attorney General?
I think that...
Are they extremists or not, Attorney General?
Everything in that memo is
Are they extremists or not? I'm asking a simple question. Say no if you think that was wrong.
Catholics are not extremists. No.
Was anyone fired for drafting and circulating?
You have in front of you the inspection division's investigation.
Just tell me yes or no, please.
I don't know.
We have no time.
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Do you agree that parents attending school board meetings should be categorized? Should parents that go to school board meetings and are very vocal about their kids' education, should they be classified as domestic terrorists?
Of course not. And my memo made clear that vigorous objections to policies in schools are protected by the First Amendment.
The president this week accused you, not the president himself, his staff, and it was in the Wall Street Journal, and it was leaked out, of mismanaging the Hunter Biden probe. Do you agree? Yes or no? It was in the Wall Street Journal article. I'm not saying that.
I'm sorry. Do I agree with the Wall Street Journal?
Yes. And that the information they released that said you botched this probe.
Yeah. I think dealt with the Hunter Biden investigation in the way I've told this.
Mr. Chairman, I yield my remaining time to you.
The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Attorney General Garland, for your decades of service to the Department of Justice, to our country and to our Constitution. It's been truly honorable service, and I think the American public as a whole recognizes that. I was struck by and appreciate your opening statement in which you made crystal clear your fidelity to the U.S. Constitution and the rule of law, and your reaffirmation that the Attorney General is not the President's lawyer. This is a welcome change from the rhetoric and actions of some of your predecessors in the last administration when they appeared before us. As we all should know, the Justice Department works for the American people to prosecute crimes, uphold the rule of law and Americans' individual rights, and keep our country safe. And Congress, of course, has a legitimate duty of oversight. But the blatantly political and misleading rhetoric which we've been subjected to today undermines the seriousness of this committee's work and ultimately the legitimacy and core values of our American institutions. It's painfully obvious to anyone who cares about our Constitution that our colleagues have called this hearing not to conduct legitimate oversight, but to once again defend the indefensible actions of the disgraced, twice impeached, and now repeatedly indicted in multiple jurisdictions former president, and to distract from their inability to perform the most basic function of Congress, to fund the federal government. So they're baselessly accusing the U.S. Department of Justice of bias against the former president and his allies. But it's important to note that those who are noisily and shamelessly trying to subvert our justice system are the same ones who seem to have both the most to fear from those ongoing investigations and the most to gain politically and personally from impeding them. As others have noted, these attempts now include trying to defund the Office of Special Counsel, Jack Smith's office, altogether. I, like so many Americans, find this behavior contemptible and far beneath what we should expect from our country's leaders. Mr. Attorney General, why is it so important for both upholding the rule of law and maintaining public trust that our justice system be able to conduct investigations into wrongdoing free from political interference?
The criminal law can impose incredible sanctions on people. It can take away their liberty. That means due process has to be followed during investigations, and that partisan considerations not play a role. That civil liberties and civil rights are protected, and the only way that can happen is if prosecutors are permitted to go about their work without any external impermissible interventions or considerations.
Thank you. I did want to take the opportunity, since this is an oversight hearing, to conduct some actual oversight. And there was an important topic in your testimony, safeguarding the right to vote. During the previous administration, I asked department officials in this committee room what actions they were taking on this critical issue, and they couldn't answer me. So could you describe the efforts that your Department of Justice is taking to protect the right to vote, a fundamental pillar of our democracy?
Yes. The Congress, in the form of the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, authorize the Department to bring cases and to enforce the Constitution of the United States with respect to the right to vote. As I'm sure you know, in the Shelby County case, the Supreme Court eliminated one of our tools, Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, but we retained Section 2, which the Supreme Court again endorsed in its last term. So we have brought cases in a number of jurisdictions where we felt that state laws unconstitutionally impinged on the right to vote. We have supported private parties when they've brought those cases, particularly in redistricting cases that violated the anti-dilution requirement of Section 2. We have a task force with respect to threats against election workers, because threatening election workers and stopping them from going about their work is a significant way in which the right to vote can be impinged. That's just a sampling.
And we certainly saw evidence of that in Pennsylvania during the last presidential election. So we really appreciate all those efforts. I find this hearing very disturbing in that we have elected officials misleading the public, attacking the foundations of our democracy, trying to sow distrust on one of the most critical pillars of that democracy, the U.S. Department of Justice. It's unacceptable and it's un-American. Mr. Chair, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record a fact sheet on the Department of Justice's work under Attorney General Garland's leadership to safeguard Americans' right to vote and protect our election officials and workers.
Without objection.
Thank you. I yield back.
Committee will be in order. Committee will be in order. Vacillated, please. The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General,
Thank you.
on August 11th, 2023, you appointed Mr. Weiss special counsel. You wrote a letter to the House and Senate Judiciary Committees where you cited extraordinary circumstances requiring the appointment. You avoided answering the question when Mr. Bentz asked you. I'll give you another chance to answer it. What were those extraordinary circumstances?
I'm afraid I'll have to give you the same answer I gave before. I've gave as much as I can give, which is that he thought that it had reached a stage where it would be appropriate, that I had promised him that I would give him any resource that he needed, and that he asked for it. And to go further would go into a pending investigation.
Okay, let's talk about that. Back on March 1st, you told the Senate Judiciary Committee that Mr. Weiss had the full authority to bring cases in other jurisdictions if he felt it was necessary. On June 7th, Mr. Weiss wrote to the Judiciary Committee stating he had been granted ultimate authority over the matter, including responsibility for deciding where, when, and whether to file charges. But by June 30th, he had changed his tune and said that his charging authority was geographically limited, and he to the U.S. Attorney's Office and then you to determine whether he can partner on the case, and if not, he can request special attorney status from the AG pursuant to 28 U.S.C. 515, and he had been assured that if necessary, he would be granted 515 authority in D.C., Central District of California, or any other district where charges could be brought. Let me ask you, is there some distinct legal authority known as special attorney status?
I'm sorry?
Is there some distinct legal authority known as special attorney status?
Yes, Section 515 permits the Attorney General to sign an order to authorize a prosecutor to work in another district.
And if you had already decided that he had full authority, why did you feel it was necessary to sign that document?
I'm sorry?
Why did Mr. Weiss feel that he would need that extra authority if you had conveyed to him that he would have all that authority?
You'll have to speak with Mr. Weiss about that. I think his 3 letters are quite clear that he understood he would have the necessary authority and that no U.S. attorney could block him.
Okay. We asked you earlier about his request for this authority, and we need to know who he spoke to about this authority and when. Before he asked you in August, he had discussions about this with others at the department. Who did he discuss special counsel authority with, and when did he do that?
I'm not going to discuss internal deliberations of the department. I guaranteed that Mr. Weiss would have the authority that he needed, and the moment he asked for the authority, I gave it to him.
Did he discuss it with the Deputy Attorney General?
Again, I'm not going to get into discussions of deliberations within the Justice Department.
That is not a valid constitutional objection.
Well, that is a valid constitutional deliberation. It has to constitutional objection. It has to do with the ability of the Justice Department to do its communications, just as your deliberations with your staff and with other members are protected by the Constitution.
Detailing who had conversations and when does not implicate the internal deliberations at the department. The substance of those deliberations, simply detailing who and when, does not implicate those.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into the internal discussions of the department or who talked to who about what. Mr. Weiss has told this committee that he well understood his ability to bring a case wherever he wanted, and I have said that he had that ability.
Do you think that the extraordinary circumstances that you cited in the appointment have anything to do with the June 22nd and July 19th testimony of whistleblowers, Special Agents Shapley and Ziegler?
I don't think it has anything to do with Mr. Shapley, no.
Gentleman,
I'll yield to the chairman.
I appreciate the gentleman yielding. Mr. Garland, have you or are you investigating who leaked the information that appeared in the Washington Post on October 6, 2022 about this investigation, about the Hunter Biden investigation?
You're saying there was an October 2022.
October 6, 2022, Washington Post writes a story about the Hunter Biden investigation. I wonder, have you investigated who leaked that information to the Washington Post?
I don't know the answer to that.
Is it Inspector General? Do you know that?
I don't want my answer to suggest that there is or isn't such an investigation. I know that the Inspector General sent a letter to Congress explaining that he had an ongoing assessment with respect to the whistleblower's charges. I don't know if that's what you're referring to.